The front door opened and the warmth of the house washed over me, but the sudden silence in the hallway told me everything I needed to know. I stood on my son's porch, holding a massive tray of roasted vegetables and a freshly baked pecan pie. It was Christmas lunch. For the last 5 years, I had arrived at this exact time, helped set the table, and taken my usual seat by the window. David finally appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He barely met my eyes. "Mom, you're here." I stepped inside, slipping off my snowy boots. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, mingling with expensive pine candles. I walked into the dining room to set the food down, and I froze. The heavy oak table looked beautiful, set with crystal glasses and linen napkins. But there were only 6 chairs. David, his wife Sarah, their 2 teenage children, and Sarah's mother Brenda were already milling around it. The 6th chair, the one where I always sat, was buried under a pile of Brenda's designer coats and a massive handbag. I stood there for a long moment. Nobody scrambled to clear it. Nobody rushed to the garage to grab a folding chair. "Is there another chair for me, David?" I asked calmly. Sarah walked past me sipping a mimosa. She didn't even stop walking. "Oh, Amanda. Brenda flew in all the way from Boston. We wanted her at the table." She offered a thin, practiced smile. "Priorities." The word hung in the air. Priorities. I looked at my son. David stared at the floor, suddenly intensely interested in a scuff mark on the hardwood. He didn't speak. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply set the pie and the vegetables on the entryway console. "Enjoy your lunch," I murmured. I turned around, opened the heavy front door, and walked back out into the cold. I didn't look back to see if David followed me. The quiet click of the door closing behind me was the only answer I needed. The drive home was completely silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just gripped the steering wheel, watching the snow fall against the windshield. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity washing over me. For 4 years, ever since my husband passed away, I had been the silent pillar holding up David and Sarah's comfortable life. I paid the $1,200 monthly installment for Sarah's luxury SUV because they needed something safe for the kids. I also kept a joint credit card active for their household emergencies. Lately, those emergencies had looked a lot like spa days, premium cable packages, and expensive restaurant dinners. I had tolerated it, believing that generosity kept a family together. Sarah's comment changed everything. Priorities. I pulled into my garage, walked inside my quiet house, and made a cup of black tea. I didn't take off my coat. I sat at the kitchen island and opened my laptop. First, I logged into my banking portal. The scheduled monthly transfer for the SUV payment sat at the top of the screen, set to withdraw on the 1st of the month. I clicked Cancel Series. A little green check mark appeared. Done. Next, I opened the credit card dashboard. The balance for the secondary card, the one sitting in Sarah's wallet right now, was already at $900 for the month. I navigated to card controls. "Lock this card," the screen asked. I clicked yes. I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth finally reached my chest. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply realigning my own priorities. If I wasn't welcome at their table, my money wouldn't be paying for the food on it. I closed the laptop, wondering exactly how long it would take for them to notice. The answer came the very next morning. It was Boxing Day, the busiest shopping day of the year. I was in my greenhouse watering my winter orchids when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was David. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen. "Hello, David." "Mom, what is going on?" His voice was tight, breathless. "Sarah is at the department store. She just tried to buy some things for the house, and the card declined. Did you get a fraud alert?" "No," I replied, carefully inspecting a yellowing orchid leaf. There is no fraud. I locked the card. A heavy silence fell over the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television in his background. You locked it. He repeated, his tone shifting from confused to defensive. Because of yesterday, Mom, come on. Sarah didn't mean anything by it. Brenda is a guest. You're completely overreacting. I'm not reacting at all, I corrected him. I'm simply reorganizing my finances. The account belongs to me. I will no longer be funding your wife's shopping trips. Mom, we rely on that card, he snapped. You rely on it because I allowed it. You are a 40-year-old man, David. You and Sarah both have incomes. You can pay for your own purchases. You can't just cut us off without a warning. I think the warning was when I was left standing in the hallway of the house I helped furnish, while your wife told me her mother was a priority over me. I didn't wait for him to formulate an excuse. I ended the call. My hands were perfectly steady. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to my orchids. I knew the storm was only just beginning, but for the first time in years, I held the umbrella. An hour later, the text messages began. They weren't from David. They were from Sarah. Amanda. This is incredibly petty. The kids needed winter gear. Turn the card back on. Hello? Are you ignoring me? You're punishing your own grandchildren because you couldn't handle sitting somewhere else for one meal. Unbelievable. I read the messages from my spot on the sofa. I didn't type a single word in response. I simply stared at the screen, observing the sheer entitlement dripping from every syllable. She truly believed my money was her birthright. Then another thought struck me. I looked at the carrier logo at the top of my phone screen. When David had lost his job briefly 3 years ago, I had moved their numbers onto my unlimited cellular plan to save them money. He had gotten a new job months later, but they had conveniently forgotten to ever switch off my account. I opened the carrier app. 4 lines. Mine, David, Sarah's, and the iPad the kids used. I selected Sarah's number. Suspend line. I selected David's number. Suspend line. I left the iPad alone. The kids didn't deserve to lose their games. But the adults, they could find their own network. The text from Sarah stopped instantly. The silence in my living room was beautiful. I opened a novel I had been meaning to read for weeks and settled into the cushions. I knew exactly what would happen next. Stripped of her ability to send angry texts, Sarah would force David to deal with me directly. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:00 p.m. He would be here by 3. I heard the heavy thud of a car door closing at 2:45 p.m. Heavy, rushed footsteps pounded up my front walkway. I didn't get up. A moment later, the front door unlocked and swung open. David stormed into the hallway, his face flushed red against the winter chill. He was holding his dead cell phone in his hand, like a piece of evidence. "Are you out of your mind?" he demanded from the entryway. I placed a bookmark in my novel and stood up, walking calmly into the hall. "David, you do not walk into my house and shout at me. You turned off our phones, both of them. Sarah had to use the neighbor's Wi-Fi just to figure out what happened." He rubbed his temples, looking entirely exhausted. "Mom, please, turn the lines back on and unlock the card. Sarah is furious." "Sarah's anger is not my responsibility," I noted. "And neither are your phone bills." He took a step forward, his voice dropping into a pleading tone. "Why are you doing this? I'm your son. And you are my guest right now." I extended my right hand palm up. "Give me your key." He blinked. "What?" "The key to my house. You just used it to enter without knocking simply because you were angry. Give it back." His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't do this." "The key, David." He stared at me, searching for the mother who always caved, the mother who always smoothed things over. He didn't find her. With a heavy sigh, he unclipped the brass key from his ring and dropped it into my palm. It felt surprisingly heavy. I'll see you when you learn how to knock, I instructed, closing my hand around the metal. He turned around and walked out. He didn't slam the door, but the soft click echoed loudly. I locked the deadbolt. The boundary was finally set. The next few days passed with absolute tranquility. I reorganized my pantry, finished my book, and researched a trip to Italy I had dreamed about for a decade. I didn't hear from David or Sarah. They were likely giving me the silent treatment, assuming I would break first. Then came the morning of January the 2nd. My home phone, a landline I kept mostly for the alarm system, rang loudly in the kitchen. I checked the caller ID. It was the main office number of David's architectural firm. "Hello, Mom." David's voice was barely a whisper. He sounded like he was hiding in a supply closet. "Did you change the bank transfer for the car?" I canceled it. I confirmed, wiping down the marble counter. "The financing company just emailed me. The auto pay bounced. Mom, the payment is $1,200. We don't have that sitting in checking. We spent our extra money on Christmas." "That sounds like a budgeting issue," I observed. "Mom, please. If we miss this payment, it ruins my credit score. Sarah needs that car to take the kids to school." "The kids take the yellow bus that stops at the end of your street," I corrected him. "Sarah uses that car to drive to her Pilates classes. If you cannot afford the vehicle, I suggest you contact the dealership about a trade-in. A used sedan is much more affordable." "Sarah will never drive a used sedan," he hissed. "Then Sarah can find a full-time job." "You can't just leave us stranded," he pleaded. "You aren't stranded, David. You make $90,000 a year. You are simply living beyond your means because I was subsidizing your lifestyle." I paused. "Have a productive day at work." I hung up the receiver. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was incredibly light. 2 days later, I was sweeping the light dusting of snow off my front porch when a silver rental car pulled into my driveway. I paused, leaning on my broom. It wasn't David. It wasn't Sarah. The passenger door opened and Brenda stepped out, wrapping a thick faux fur coat tightly around her shoulders. She marched up my walkway with a look of deep, practiced concern. "Amanda," she greeted, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "We need to talk." "Good morning, Brenda. I wasn't expecting you." I didn't invite her inside. She sighed, looking at me with absolute pity. "Sarah is completely distraught. David is incredibly stressed. You are tearing their family apart over a simple misunderstanding at dinner. I know you're older, and sometimes changes in tradition are hard, but you need to be the bigger person here." I rested my hands on the top of the broom handle. A simple misunderstanding. It was just a chair, Amanda. It wasn't about the chair, Brenda. It was about the lack of respect. I looked her firmly in the eye. "But since you are so deeply concerned about their stress, I assume you are here to take over the SUV payments, or perhaps the credit card bill." Brenda's eyes widened. She took a tiny step backward. I live on a fixed income. I can't afford their car. Neither can they," I noted smoothly. "So unless you have a checkbook in that expensive purse of yours to cover their lifestyle, this conversation is over." Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The confident peacemaker facade shattered instantly. "You're terribly bitter," she finally muttered. "No, Brenda. I'm completely free. Have a safe flight back to Boston." I turned my back, walked inside, and locked the door. Through the window, I watched her scurry back to her rental car. She wouldn't be bothering me again. January dragged on cold and gray. I stayed entirely out of their lives. I didn't check social media, and I didn't call to ask about the kids. If I wanted to see my grandchildren, I knew I had to wait until David figured out how to be a father without my wallet propping him up. Toward the end of the month, I drove across town to the large garden center to buy some new ceramic pots. As I passed the massive auto dealership on the highway, a familiar sight caught my eye. Parked right near the intake garage was Sarah's pristine white luxury SUV. I slowed my car slightly. Standing near the glass doors of the office was David. He was wearing his heavy winter coat holding a stack of paperwork. He looked exhausted. Beside him stood Sarah, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring at the ground. She wasn't yelling. She just looked defeated. I didn't stop. I pressed the accelerator and continued toward the garden center. I felt a brief, sharp twinge of guilt in my chest. A mother's instinct is always to rescue. I could have easily pulled in, written a check, and bought their smiles back. But I knew exactly what that would cost me. It would cost me my dignity. That evening, I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of red wine and my laptop. I opened the travel website I had been visiting daily. I selected a 2-week guided tour through Tuscany and Rome for the upcoming spring. I entered my credit card details. The transaction went through instantly. Just as the confirmation email hit my inbox, my phone chimed. It was a single text message from David. "We traded the car in today. Got a used Honda. Sarah is barely speaking to me." I looked at the message for a long time. I typed a simple reply. "Good cars. Very reliable. Good night, David." It was late March before I saw my son again. The snow had melted, leaving the world muddy and raw. He hadn't asked me to come to the house. Instead, he asked if I would meet him at a small, neutral coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a corner table. He had bought me my favorite Earl Grey tea. I sat down across from him. He looked older, tired, but somehow more solid. "Hi, Mom," he murmured. "Hello, David." He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. I wanted to apologize, face to face. I waited. I didn't jump in to rescue him from the silence. Not just for Christmas. He continued looking down at the table. "For the last few years, I let Sarah treat you like a walking ATM, and I let myself believe we deserved it. When you cut us off, we panicked. We fought. A lot." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Turns out our marriage was a lot easier when you were paying for the fun parts. And now," I asked softly, "now we have a budget. We eat at home. Sarah had to take a part-time job at a boutique." He finally looked up, meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you at that dinner. You were right to walk out." "No, I agreed, simply. He nodded, accepting the boundary. "The kids miss you. I'd like to bring them over to your house this weekend. Just me and the kids. Sarah knows she isn't welcome right now." "I would like that very much." I smiled. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask me to turn the phones back on. He just drank his coffee, finally acting like the man I had tried to raise. May in Tuscany was more beautiful than any photograph could capture. I sat on the terrace of the small villa overlooking miles of rolling green vineyards, a glass of local wine resting near my hand. My phone buzzed on the iron table. I glanced at the screen. It was a picture from David, my 2 grandchildren holding up their report cards, smiling brightly. Below the photo, a simple message. "Missing you. Have a great dinner tonight." I smiled and tapped a little heart on the image. Things were not perfect. Sarah and I hadn't spoken since December, and I was perfectly fine keeping it that way. David brought the kids to my house twice a month. We baked, we watched movies, and we actually talked. Without the shadow of financial obligation hanging over us, our relationship had become genuine. He was learning how to lead his own household, and I was learning how to enjoy my own life. I thought back to that cold Christmas afternoon. Priorities. Sarah had meant it as an insult, a way to put me in my place, but she had accidentally given me the greatest gift of my life. By taking away my chair at her table, she forced me to realize I had the power to build my own. I picked up my glass of wine and took a sip, enjoying the warm Italian breeze. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I wasn't an emergency fund. I was Amanda Collins, and my priority finally was me. You know, the biggest takeaway from Amanda's story isn't about revenge or being petty. It's simply about recognizing your own worth. For so long, many of us are taught that loving our family means giving endlessly, even when we are taken for granted. But true generosity should never cost you your dignity. Setting a financial or emotional boundary doesn't make you a bad parent or a selfish person. Sometimes quietly stepping back is the exact push your loved ones need to finally grow up and take responsibility. And more importantly, it gives you the freedom to finally start living for yourself. If Amanda's story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to make a tough decision to protect your own peace, let me know down in the comments. I'd really love to read your experiences. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about real-life family dynamics and finding your own voice. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.